Greetings and salutations, all you fabulous folk out there on the tubes of you, and welcome to the first actual convening of the Disinformed Book Club.
Yay!
Woo.
I'm Shane.
I'm John.
I'm Michael.
I'm Courtney.
Now, we've been in a semi-formal capacity discussing largely the works of Stephen King for quite some time now, so it's not shocking that this is what we start with. But we're going to formalize this finally and make it something that's a little bit more linear, hopefully.
Yeah, focused.
Indeed.
Ish.
Which, with a book like this, you're going to need to plot a pretty straight trail.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
So, in any event, I had recently recommended on our podcast, the Disinformed podcast. That is, for those of you playing the home game and who have no clue what that is, we host a show weekly where we discuss random esoteric topics and lie about them. It is grossly entertaining, I assure you. But I had recommended, because I had just recently finished Stephen King's Revival, that, the kids here on the call with me should also read it, because I'm one of those folks that has to fop off all the things I love on those around me. My
you like to share your life.
Indeed, it's infectious.
Foster your enthusiasm. Foster upon foister.
Yeah, foist off.
Damn near killed her.
Foist off.
Foister the people. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
But so everybody actually partook, and I'm sure that we are all going to have dramatically different trajectories for how we initially responded to this and where the serpentine path of this book led us. So we'll just start round robin. And how did everybody feel about the book in totality?
Anybody want to take a stab?
Bull BS. No. Sorry.
Man,
I don't know what I'm doing.
You're the worst.
He's lapsing into his other.
Where am I? What
year is it? There we go. Do it.
I very much enjoyed the book. Like,
is it because you're a
lavish
Lovecraftian
praise.
goon?
Yes, very much so. In fact, actually, and I told Shane this as soon as I finished, like literally within a minute of putting down the book, I told Shane, this reminds me of a Lovecraft story. And I actually looked through and I looked it up and I read it.
I don't think we said this, but it should be obvious. Spoilers from here on out?
I mean, if you're walking into a book discussion,
I know.
We're not professional booktubers, so we'll establish that first off. Yeah. We're friends with those who make them. By the way, shout out to Book Invasion Scott, super fan. But yeah, it's not something we do consistently.
I'm just saying that because we had somebody, like, we're having a dog costume contest at work, and we have posters. I promise this ties into why we need to say spoilers, because we have this contest going on, and it very explicitly, it says on the flyer, it's a dog costume contest. And there's already been like a handful of people being like, so can like people enter too? Or
are you a
dog? Because you assume it's a costume for dogs, not humans wearing a dog costume.
Oh, okay.
Furries are allowed.
It's not a meetup for furries. Is that not what you're doing?
Not to my knowledge. Anyway, sorry, that wasn't to be off topic. That was just to say that people need warning labels.
I just thought you were being cruel to one of your coworkers. It's just we already got one person who strongly resembles a basset hound here. Why not expand the palette?
It's me.
Plot twist. Whoa.
So I went to get a drink the other night, and all of a sudden, droopy dog's ambling over to me with a shotgun. I was going, "Would you like a drink, sir?"
It's actually a really good impression.
That bar can have all my money.
For sure. But yeah, so with Michael, it scratched an itch for Lovecraft.
Oh, most certainly. Especially because there are a lot of parallels between this, and I won't go into detail about it, but there are a lot of parallels between this and the Lovecraft story. I believe it was From Beyond. And it was very, very similar to the end of the book, to the end of Revival. Specifically, to be very succinct, which is very difficult for me to do. The Lovecraft story involves the narrator and his scientist friend, who essentially develops a way to peer into another dimension through his research.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, you finish your thought.
No, it's pretty much that, and everything goes to lack of a better term, shit. And it ends fairly similar.
This show is not for children.
Yeah, thank you. It ends fairly similar to the ending of Revival.
I would be really surprised if we made it through this episode child friendly. Even without, again, the much needed warning. This book is impossible to tiptoe around.
Oh, come on. Heroin use is something that is very chic with the 12-year-olds these days.
The youths love their heroin.
Maybe with Rucksack Randy.
You leave Bindle Bob out of this. Brad, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
So I guess, one, Courtney, have you ever read anything from Lovecraft?
No.
Neither have I. So my question for both Shane and for Michael, since it is very much leaning on Lovecraft style, even if you haven't read Lovecraft, I think you can agree. Well, I don't know, because I know some Lovecraft because of things that I enjoy that are influenced by.
Like the fan fiction we did?
Like, yeah, the fanfic, Bloodborne. And then, there's other things too. But as someone who's never read anything from Lovecraft, if you can take his problematic verbiage, we'll
cut that part. There's no cats in there that are offensively named. No.
Yeah, like if you take that aside, like, is it still approachable to read today, or is it dated enough? Kind of like trying to read like Dickens is like really troubling, because they're writing for words.
Yes. I can almost guarantee it's probably going to be difficult for you to clear the hurdle. Yes.
Yeah.
It is very anachronistic language, and he makes a meal of it. I mean, when I tell you that he finds 12 different ways to tell you that someone is bridging the gap of madness, he literally takes pains to point out, at this point, I started to lose my tenuous grip on reality as I was shaken from sanity's grip by, and he just like keeps sort of enumerating the various ways that he's fallen off the wagon. And you're like, I get it. It's spooky. And then he doesn't actually ever really detail what happened. So Lovecraft has the exceptional ability to give you the Hitchcock kind of feel, which is, it's, more terrifying to leave something to your imagination, to say that it was something that just simply pushed you past the limits of your own mental competency. And that's great. But sometimes he really takes so long telling you that it's indescribable that you're like, okay, you've kind of just defined futility.
Which, bringing it to Revival, I think is a compliment that I have for the ending, is that usually, King varies on what he'll do for a reveal. And I agree with both camps, but I feel like this is one of the times where he shows you what's behind the curtain, and horrifying. Yeah, like actually legitimately horrifying. And I think for me, I ended up, for the most part, like I would need to reread it to actually like form whether or not it's going to be a book that I'll carry with me for a while. So I know, Shane, not to talk for you before you do, but you're saying it's in your top Kings right now as far as his work.
Yeah, no question.
For me, I would have to reassess. I just, now that I know where it's going and where everything led, like I just need to process it again. Maybe actually read it in hand instead of listen, and like kind of pick up on some of the pacing. But a compliment that I have for him is that, and then also he pulled like a Chuck Palahniuk, where Revival was a chorus for him throughout the entire book. Like the concept of revival and the different definitions of what that is. And I thought that was particularly interesting, and it's why I like Chuck Palahniuk books, is because it is a chorus. He deliberately throws in mentions of revival and different allusions to
because that was the whole idea behind the secret lightning in a way, because it was supposed to be like a revitalization of the person. But I still wanted to dwell a little bit longer on Lovecraft, if that was okay.
Oh, please.
Because I did want to explain why I enjoy Lovecraft so much. And it's because, to me, he takes 12 years to get to the same point where the person is going crazy. But for me, it helps give context, and it makes it feels like a very slow burn, where you're sitting and dwelling on, he's saying it several different ways, but for me, it makes it click better.
No, you just like it because he explains things the way you do.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me enumerate every conceivable shade of this for you before I'm finished.
It's just the whole time.
In that one context, him and I feel kindred spirits. Just that, nothing else.
Okay, you're teetering on a dangerous line.
None of my cats are named offensively, because I don't
you
have any. But if I did,
Like
none of them would be named offensively. And if you aren't sure about that, just look up Lovecraft's cat's name.
It's a weird name for a cat, offensively.
Better than what he actually named it.
Very true. But another thing that I would like to say, why Lovecraft wouldn't really, it'd be a little bit difficult to get into Lovecraft. Not just that it takes a long time for him to enumerate the same point over and over again. It's also a lot of the horror comes from the fact that we don't know. And it's supposed to be kind of that idea that like, we have at that time, for a little bit of scientific history,
jazz magicians.
Jazz magicians instead of musicians. Yeah, I like that. A lot of people assume that we already had discovered the workings of the universe and that we had already had everything down to a T, and it was just crossing the line, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, etc. But he came in it with the whole like, no, there's a lot more that we don't know, and it's beyond our human comprehension. And that's something that's a little bit different that we don't really, that people kind of understand more nowadays, especially after with like you talk to someone about any sort of discipline of science. I mean, where you in a society where people don't trust the science most of the time anyway, but not a lot of people understand the final workings of biology nowadays, or physics, or et cetera, like that. And so we have a better idea of like, yeah, we don't understand it, it's beyond our comprehension. Whereas people in that time, they thought they knew everything. And so I guess what
he's speaking to the perils of ignorance, to allow me to succinctly sum up what you're saying, which is also thematically tied to the story we're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's actually, that summarizes everything I wanted to say.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It's almost like Shane's done this before.
Yeah.
I have a feeling I should just I need to be tethered to you and go to your classes so that I can be your interpreter into English for all of your students.
I
feel like Shane and Michael, I feel like it's like Hunt and Clark would be like a good law firm. You know, they're the Nelson and Murdoch, you know. Courtney,
CNH, yes.
Courtney, we've been barreling over you.
I'm used to it. I'm a woman.
What are you, King? What are you, Stephen King?
No, I really enjoyed this book. It's funny is it had a lot of thematic parts that were very similar to a show that our dog is named after, which is really entertaining.
Oh, okay.
Say the show.
Full Metal Alchemist. So in that show in particular, some of the similar themes, like at one point there's a guy who has a ring and he's going around healing people, but it's fraudulent. And I thought that was an interesting parallel. The two main characters in that show try to bring their mom back to life, and they see the truth. And the truth is very similar to kind of what we see at the end of the book, which I thought was really interesting.
That's a good
point. I don't mean to bounce around too much, but we keep dancing around the very, very left field.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do have ending. A plan here.
Okay, cool. So then I'll hold that thought then, because I have a theory, and I think the only one that can really back it up or discuss it with me is going to be Shane, unfortunately. But Courtney and Michael, if it interests you, there is another Stephen King book that you might want to read after the fact. But overall, you enjoyed it then? I think we're all, at the most part, at least nodding our head that we enjoyed it. I don't think a single one of us disliked the book, right?
Well, yeah, I enjoyed it immensely. In fact, I would say it's also in, I haven't read that many Stephen King books as Shane, but I would say it's definitely in my, I would almost say top. Yeah, I would say top 3. Yeah.
I, as always, gave myself homework that I didn't do.
Oh no.
The first thing about the book that really struck me, and I remember talking to Shane at band practice, I was like, hey, do you remember the term that he used? Or was that a show, I think, when we're setting up? Like, do you remember the term that he used for Jacobs on like the just descriptor of his character that he's, and I remember what it is, and it's a fifth business, like you're the fifth business to somebody. And I really find that concept interesting. Like, I just like that King wrote something that I've felt, or that like I feel like it's very like a universal feeling of like someone that comes into your life just to usher you to the next point and to do nothing else but that. But then also to bring him back, like he's just a recurring person of doom.
So to dovetail off of that and kind of help to initiate those who have no clue what we're talking about, is obviously sometimes you do want to dive into a discussion about a book because you don't know anything about it and you're intrigued. So the general plot description given to us is that a Methodist minister named of Charles Jacobs loses both his wife and son in a horrific accident at the beginning of the book. It's one of the inciting incidents. And all of this is sort of recounted to us by the main character, Jamie Morton, who is a child at the time. And so he starts with sort of his youthful experiences with Jacobs as a minister who loses his face, his wife lost the face. He lost his faith and then is forced to sort of reconsider his role in the universe, and is sort of, reaches a state of despondency and is a free-floating vessel at that point with no real ballast. And then we follow Jamie and his adventures, basically, or misadventures through the course of his life, from being a teenager who falls in love with music and then becomes a musician, and then of course runs afoul of normative behavior, or is in keeping with normative behavior for most musicians, and develops a bit of a drug problem, and then runs into Jacobs again. So you kind of see this odd tumble dryer of experience that John was referring to, where Jacobs as a character is defined as being his fifth business, or the character who comes in just to sort of incite something that moves the plot along a little further. And so interesting that we're there, but that gives you kind of a general overview, and then naturally we'll just spoil the remainder of this. But that gives you kind of the broad strokes as to why some of this is interesting. So what was kind of the hook that initially grabbed everybody? Because I felt like there's so much that occurs over the course of the story that individualizes things to each of us. And I was kind of involved the entire way, because there are a lot of weird parallels to my own kind of experiences that I found here. So I'm curious as to what was kind of the snare for everybody else's interest.
I got it. What got me was his teenage years, so fairly close to the beginning of the book. His whole high school experience, or Jamie, the character's high school experience, wasn't similar to mine, but like the high school sweetheart deal, and like getting into a band before you could drive, and then getting your license, like that was almost like a direct pull from like my own experience. So that drug me in, because I was like, oh my god, am I about to read a book about like this teenager in the music business? And then like you don't know where it's going, so I'm like, is the revival going to be like some Jim Jones-esque kind of shit?
Fair point.
But anyway, the romance at the beginning is what got me, being truthful. Like it was a very cute, I think a very, very cute story, and that little bubble, and the fact that it comes back in horrific ways later on.
That it
I
does.
I didn't expect the third or the final act to introduce a character that by that point I had forgotten about, which I guess is metaphorical to how life kind of moves on. But
there's a lot of echoes in the sequence, which is what is really so sort of like emotionally stirring for me reading. I was like, this is exceptionally well done. Even by his standards, I think he manages to bring things back around here better than he has in a lot of things that I've read. But
Courtney, Mike?
Go for it, Michael.
Okay. So I will say that my first hook into it was when Shane initially said that there was some Lovecraft-esque things in there. And
I mean, from the source material, I'm not asking how
itself.
I pitched it.
I know. But that was what originally hooked me
Allow me
into.
to be contrarian.
I'm just saying that.
He's the risky one.
That's what drove me initially, because I knew that at the end there was going to be a lot of those elements, and I'm just a glutton for that sort of like terror that comes from the unknown. And I know that Stephen King is really good at doing that. He has done that before, especially in things like It and the Dark Tower series. So I was already drawn in from that. But another thing that kept me going the whole time was how I wouldn't say recycle, because I would feel like it would be doing it a disservice, but there's a lot of reoccurring elements from previous books that were used in here. I think I even mentioned that to Shane at one point, where I'm saying, oh, okay, well, let's see, his Jamie Morton's sister was abused by her husband, and I immediately
ultimately murdered by her husband.
Yes, and that brought me back to It
with Bev.
yeah. And there were other elements that, and I can't remember them off the top of my head,
I feel that's
that-
kind of ubiquitous to a lot of things, though. That's not just
Well-
something strictly for King.
Are you trying? Are you
but-
trying to say that what hooked you into the King story was getting back into the King universe after taking a break?
Yes, yeah,
Mhm.
and seeing that there are a lot of parallels with his other books, and so I knew that it was going to be another good experience with King, and then I also knew that I was going to be treated to the kind of Lovecraftian
You're gonna get
aspect,
hurt, and you're gonna like it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's all just another level of the tower, my friend.
He does
something
make
like
the
that.
wheel. He does make a wheel
he said
reference
life is like a wheel.
17,000
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
and
yeah.
every time he's like, yeah, life is kind of like a wheel. I was like, you mean Ka? You mean
Yeah, I
Ka's
was
like a
like,
wheel?
Say it
Oh,
again, please.
Man,
Say it
if you
again
want to
for
start
me.
getting into like the hair-raising trigger moments, so I'm now reading Lisi's story. And it's one that I have no frame of reference for and had nothing, but in it, the lead is sort of, the wife of an author whose husband has passed away, and she's now sort of reflecting on their life and their shared experiences. But one of the author's books that is sort of famed as being about a crazed clown kind of character was entitled The Empty Devils. At which point, for those who played the home game and remember this, that is what they refer to the members of the True Knot as when Dick Halloran comes back as a ghost to talk about them with Danny. He says these empty devils. So, and then there are parallels in the Dark Tower with, Pennywise also sharing some of that with I'm forgetting the character's name, but the clown, sort of huckster, jokester, comedian at the end as well. So there's a lot of very interesting tendrils that kind of play around with these things.
I also don't think it was coincidental that in Revival, especially when they're in the circus scenes, or the side
The
show,
carnival.
In the carnival,
the
yeah.
carny,
Oh.
Whatever.
Tomato, potato.
That Jacob's, and then eventually Jamie starts referring to outsiders as rubes, which was, if I'm not mistaken, in Dr. Sleep, that's what the True Knot would call, a lot of the less gifted individuals.
He's also very big on, I should mention that this book, Revival, came out the same year that Joyland came out, which is another shorter work. And he refers to Jacobs having worked at Joyland as well. So having just read Joyland this last year as well, it just happened to be happenstance that I chose to read those two things in close proximity to one another. And so I'm very familiar with the plot of that story, and it is a ghost story in and of itself. And so there's a lot of very interesting supernatural elements that thread throughout all of this. And so seeing those two things running in parallel as well hits all the glorious sort of, goosebumpy things for me as well. So a lot of interconnectivity, but we've now saved, of course, the best for last, because Courtney always refuses to speak first.
Show us the hooks.
I have a sneaking suspicion what initially grabbed you, because you somewhat mentioned it during conversation, but it's what I expected as well.
No, I thought I did mention this before, just the kind of the religious overtones, because it wasn't subtle by any means.
No.
And I think just off the bat with kind of the conversation that he had over the anthill was really interesting. And then from there, you could just kind of like eased into it. I would say about halfway through the book, though, I kind of got what the ending was going to be, mainly because of just certain religious themes. Like it very much like kind of pointed to that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoyed it when it actually came to fruition,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to see that other side. I thought that was really cool.
As somebody who is a big fan of,
Yep, there's
it was something that I was expecting. As the discussion of the electricity and the lightning started playing into effect, I was like, okay. I did not expect the turn, though, of what actually manifested. And that absolutely rocked me. And I think that was one of the beautiful aspects of that sort of thread that gets pulled, is that he's telling you, and John kind of asked me this the other day, is like, is there a lot of rewarding sort of detail work that exists throughout the story that makes the reread a little more fulfilling since I read it twice within, the 2-month period. And I will say, from what Courtney just indicated and running throughout, he absolutely gives you clues from the moment that you start, because it's an anthill that you're originally exposed to. When the producer starts hallucinating and having those moments, he's referring to seeing people as ants. And so you have all of these little things, that start presenting themselves, and you're like, this is weird. I don't know what's going on. And then when you finally get the peek through the portal into the maw, it's like, oh my God, the image alone is disturbing enough. But then when you start contemplating what that means and the ramifications of everything, was terrifying.
That's what was so heavy to me. And I almost texted you guys when I got to it, because it's interesting to see what he does with this character that he's developed for over 400 pages. And then once he gives him the information at what lies beyond, and then he survives the encounter, like, what do you do with that information? I thought was a really interesting question that is kind of looming over the epilogue of the book. Because I didn't even get to the epilogue. I got to the null, which is what they refer to as, beyond the door or whatever. And I was like, I don't think, and this isn't like a cry for help. This is like, if you put it, let's play the Marvel what if game. So what if you were the one that went and saw that it was the null? I don't think that I would really want to. I don't know how I would feel, because it's like, oh, first impulse, you're like, all right, I'll just off myself. Like, if everything's pointless, bye.
I mean, that's what a lot of them did. So,
well, you want to get there sooner?
I was like, not when that's waiting for you.
But that's what I'm saying. So like the trigger impulse is to be like, screw this. But then it's like, oh, but then I have to go, I'm just going to suffer. So that's it. Now I understand when I saw reviews, and I think Shane said it too, where it's like, this is more bleak and it's darker than Pet Sematary could ever hope to be, not because of what leads up to it, but just because of how it ends.
The implications.
Pet Sematary, the implications. Pet Sematary is bleak and dark the entire time through. It is not, there's no sun in that book. Like there's no happy moments really. Everyone's deplorable, as Shane's pointed out. There's no redeeming character arcs truly, in my opinion, in Pet Sematary. However, in Revival, you get these characters that are lush, and you get a lot of people that have redemptive arcs, or even the main character. Like he does, by the point where he's seeing Jacobs, like he's made a lot of mistakes, but he's also turned it around and lived a decent life by that point. So then to have that information just feels, and is just a gut punch moment.
Yeah, it is really just staring into the pit of despair and trying to figure out what the point of anything is at that point, and not just reaching total despondency, if that's because for me personally, having ridden the roller coaster of having been raised in an environment, in a town that was hyper Christian and was exclusionist of any other different trains of thought, like it was not an accepting community, to then, sort of feel that wave crash over you when you are the outsider who then starts bemoaning the fact that what just God could have these things happen. So the speech, or the sermon, the terrible sermon as given by Jacobs, like rung a lot of bells with me, that particularly in my adolescent sort of angsty phase leaving religion, resonated with me a lot, because it's like sort of the Hannibal Lecter line, remember the same God that gave us swans made typhus. Like, it's really a difference in sort of looking at the yin and the yang and the contrast of everything, of like, I don't believe that this is a good thing if something so great and terrible can exist that at a whim will just wipe out the entire population of the planet because I'm pissed today. Like, I don't need a petulant teenager that's created my universe. And so then to watch that start, and then once the musical aspects began, like, King is so engrossing with storytelling that you just get enveloped like a warm blanket, where something feels so wholesome and kind of redolent of something that happened in your own life. Because I've had moments where old guy sits down with a guitar and starts playing a song, and watching the way that someone is completely transformed by music, and the act of performing takes someone who's, not necessarily well-spoken, who's awkward and can't function very well, immediately becomes one of the most engaging human beings on the planet when they start playing a guitar, and you're like, whoa, this sort of transmogrification that occurs. So I rode the rails with this the entire time. From I was in a band when I was a teenager. I started playing music in a call it whatever you want as a professional capacity, but I've done the show up and just play a gig in the studio and then go out on tour for a couple dates with some things. And like, I've experienced a lot of these things, so that when I finally reached the carnival stage, I was like, oh my God, please don't be forecasting the rest of my existence by playing the rest of this out. And then when the story really started sort of getting to the fever pitch that it eventually escalated to, I was like, oh man, I don't think I want to see what's here. And then you finally get to that last chapter and everything that manifests there. I was like, I didn't need to see what was behind the door.
Yeah.
I didn't want to know.
Quick aside, I don't know if any of you, except for Shane, will know the books. You probably do, maybe. It reminded me, and it didn't remind me, it made me look whether or not Libby, Overdrive, had
Support your local library, by the way.
Yes, if they had Dean Koontz's Frankenstein, because I remember reading them way long time ago, but I don't remember whether or not they were good. They were like summer reading books for me,
The first one, actually, I have all of them if you need to borrow them.
I
obviously.
will borrow one.
Yes, the first one I was really engrossed by, and I thought it was a very interesting take on the tale. And then it was the law of diminished returns. By the time we got around to the fourth one, I hated him actively for writing it.
Just
and
since it was kind of topical wearing the shirt, and then some of the themes in the book, it just made me think of it.
No, I actually really liked it. And that was why I was so pleased by the differing approach, which is kind of one of the reasons why I'm sort of revering the idea for revival as well, because I do like Lovecraft and I do find the storytelling great, even though his execution is not always as good as the conception.
That's fair. Yes.
And so there's actually
a polite way of putting it.
Well, there's a collection of short stories, and this happens routinely because I've seen other individuals like Neil Gaiman weigh in on it. But there was a book that was a collection of short stories called Cthulhu 2000 that I read when I first started working at the library, and has very compelling takes on, like, having weird lights in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, which is very Lovecraftian in and of itself, and someone who is sort of ensnared or bewitched by the lights as they float out. And it was a very creepy story. And it doesn't play with the elder gods or any of the other things, but the spirit of Lovecraft is there because it's the unknown and the unexplored, and somebody who's willing to go beyond the boundaries and try to regale you with the tale backwards. And one of my favorite Lovecraft short stories, as I mentioned, is Pickman's Model, which we've talked about previously as well. Similar sort of thing where you think you know what's behind the precipice, and then you look over and you were not prepared for it. And so it's one of the things I really appreciated. And so to see King pick up the ball and run with it and say, I'll tell you a Lovecraft story. And you don't see it coming, because he does not really start lifting the veil until you get to that last bit where you go up to, I'm forgetting what the name of the ranch or whatever the place is that leads up to the
return to the
Goat
beginning,
Mountain?
essentially.
Yes.
Was it? Yeah.
But until you start seeing, it's like, what is this leading to? Like, I get that he's probably going to try. I'm thinking in my head, he's going to try to bring his wife and child back from the dead. And like, this is how he's going to do this. Right. And like thinking that he can do that. But then it's far more insidious and even more disturbing that his hubris, he feels like he knows better. And so then you're talking about grimoires and investigating these texts that discuss things that are forbidden and otherwise evil.
Which they actually do. Oh, sorry. I was really quick. He also mentions the Necronomicon. He doesn't say it's real. He says it's fake, but one of the real, air quotes, grimoires
that inspired it. Yeah.
Yes. And I thought that was great.
It's kind of a complaint that I have, though, is that final act, I felt like there were others, like the middle of the book kind of bowed down just a little bit. And I feel like he could have spent a lot more time focusing on the investigation of Jacobs and the grimoires and like everything that Jacobs was up to behind the scenes. And I felt like, I don't know if you guys agree or not, but I thought that it would have been interesting to see more of that kind of lore. But then I can see where Shane said earlier of like, it's, the imagination filled in a lot more, kind of made that desperate search feel a little more,
because that's
on your seat, edge of your seat kind of stuff. But
that's one of the main things with Lovecraft, is that you are only given just the barest amount to form your own opinions, to pretty much guide your imagination or your nightmares, what have you. And I appreciated that he went that way, because if he were to go into too much detail, it would be like almost like prematurely firing, pulling the curtain back too early. And I felt like it was good that he had that reveal towards the very end. But that's also just my own personal taste.
It's what you yeah
because he wrote it very Lovecraftian in that regard, where they have these things. And then another point, even with all the investigation, because that was one of the main points why he wanted to visit Jacobs towards the end, not the very end part, but that was one of the reasons why he visited him later on, was to confront him about the investigations. And it was very clear that Jacobs didn't care. So if we were to add more background into the investigation, I felt like it wouldn't have gone anywhere, at least in terms of the book. It would have been nice background information for us, of course, because everyone likes more background information. But if he were to go like and say, I have all these lists of people and that's what you did this and this is what happened, blah, 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 it wouldn't have had the same sort of, it would have had the same sort of effect on Jacobs.
And ultimately,
like, I don't care.
He doesn't want to be stopped either.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It wouldn't have swayed him if like 10,000 people were experimented on and most of them died, as opposed to the couple hundred or something like that.
From a compliment that I saw, a review that I read, not being 1,000-page book probably is helpful, because that could have easily done the king curse of a very weighty tome.
Over explaining. The thing that I appreciate, and one, I think he actually refers to it in the course of the text of saying like a blind man in a rush doesn't see the cliff. Or maybe I think I'm actually quoting Dune when I say this.
It's something similar. I know there's something involving cliff, because I know what you're talking about. But
yes,
it's something similar to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that is actually a Dune quote as I'm thinking about it. So there you go, Courtney. But he alludes to the fact, and the thing that I really appreciated about my personal interpretation is the subversion of the religious base and the manipulation. And so that's sort of the hubristic aspect of him going, I'm going to manipulate and bilk all these simple saps for every cent that they have, and it will help further my ends. And I know how to do this. And so to explain to those of you who are still, again, following this with no context of the story, when Jamie meets up with Jacobs later on in life, he is a heroin addicted musician who's been fired from a band, and he's jonesing. And Jacobs is doing something which is called Portraits in Lightning. I won't belabor some of the points here, but he's using a degree of some strange electricity that he's found, or secret electricity as he calls it, in order to superimpose images of people over an already set image. And so there's a degree of motion involved. And so it's something that thrills the eye and stuns the masses. And so he's manipulating money out of people that way. He is then, in the course of the story, able to cure Jamie's heroin addiction by applying an electrical current to his brain and basically giving him shock therapy. And so Jamie is cured, but has some weird side effects. And those side effects begin to manifest themselves more as they go forward. And then later on, they part company. Jacobs goes off about his merry way, and then Jamie is given a job by Jacobs, essentially by calling in a favor, where he then becomes the head of a studio who is orchestrating the recording schedules and being a session player occasionally. And the gentleman who is running the studio and owns the studio is also someone who is cured by Jacobs, we find. So then we later discover that Jacobs is running a revival tent where he is in a very Jim Jones-esque fashion, healing folks and claiming to take their cancer away by stealing chicken gizzards out of their body and squirreling it away off stage and things like that.
That's definitely the Jim Jones thing too.
Yeah, that's why I was saying it's like Jim Jones meets Keith Richards was my first take on it at the time. Is it's just kind of like this huckster, really horrible faux pastor taking advantage of the drug-addled musician. And I felt like that subversion of Christianity and the contempt that he has for people who believe in God, particularly at the end, is something that's necessary for Jacobs to kind of show how far afield he'd gone from having lost his wife and child, because depicted as being a pretty redemptive person up front, and he's gone through some tragedy, but he's picked himself up by his bootstraps, as some folks are so fond of saying, and is trying to have a different life. But then you realize he hasn't. He's just fixated on this one thing and will not let it go. And I feel that's kind of a necessary thing to get us over the hump, to make the end make sense, because otherwise it's just sort of a bizarre turn with no real justification or foundation. But Courtney, I can see you chomping at the bit for some of this.
It's so funny to hear you compare that to Jim Jones, because I really think that there's a lot of actual people that would claim to be pastors that are very performative in that way. I even, while reading it, thought of even just Joel Osteen and the way that he kind of performs his services. And there's a church out in, I think they're based in California, called Bethel, who tried to pray over a dead little girl for days on end to try to bring her back, because they told her parents that could happen.
Oh,
so
jeez.
So a lot of this was very much along the lines of like things that in the culture I grew up in, like the tent revivals, healings, not uncommon. So for me, I thought that part was really, really interesting, because I grew up in a church where we had someone come out and claim to do a certain kind of miracle, and we found out that they were a fraud, obviously, because
right.
they were a fraud.
A frog and a liar.
Frog.
Yeah.
Right. And at that time I was probably like 14 or 15, was already like, I'm done with this whole church thing. So for me, seeing the behind the curtain and kind of having him be very in contempt, kind of like what you were saying, Shane, was like, yep, this makes sense. I have literally lived and seen people do this to real people and know how effed up it is, that like, yeah, that hurts. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And to your point, it has that sort of same sinister bend that the True Knot has, that takes something that, for the most part is intended to be pure and, decent, and then subverts it and then uses it to its own end, and rips all of the humanity out of it. And so when you see how he falls off at the end, and how those who've been healed wind up being hurt by him even worse, because they are essentially the mechanisms through which he is able to attain his ability to peek through to the other side, is even more transgressive and disgusting and deplorable at that point, because you're like, okay, so you did this thing under the auspices that you were helping someone, but ultimately it's a manipulation, and you can call that a grand metaphor for religion in general if you want to. But I, as someone who also kind of fell from the faith and was looking for something that's redemptive, of like at least hope, the despondency of we just become worm food at some point and there's no consciousness that exists beyond the veil is, I just when I was talking about it with Steven, who I hope does not see this before he reads it, I was like, it can get worse. And you don't think it until he's finally gives you that peek into what could conceivably be. And I was like, okay, so an insane elder god that rules for no good reason is just permanently torturing and utilizing all of human being, like the entirety of human history, is terrifying to me.
You know what's funny about that is that part didn't bother me as much. I think I'm desensitized to anything afterlife inducing.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I think as somebody who's chronically ill, understanding like even from Astrid's perspective of just kind of being like, yeah, do whatever, I don't care.
Yeah,
like it's probably not going to work anyway. Was really probably more impactful for me than any of the stuff in the last chapter, because of how extreme my upbringing was in some senses. The idea of afterlife is something that I'm very at peace with now, and so there's nothing you could tell me that would change that. And so I thought that's really interesting that it was so impactful for you specifically, Shane.
I think it's because the conception of hell is always sort of this emotional torment, which again, I think there is the idea that there's an incentivization to the afterlife, that if you behave well and you eat all your vegetables, then you can go to heaven, this glorious place where you're rewarded. Ooh. And then hell is just for the people who go off the deep end. But then when you posit the notion that just regardless of what happened over the course of your life, everyone is condemned to this one horrific fate, is the most demoralizing thing, because then it almost makes it worse. It kind of turns into the Patton Oswalt skycake joke of like, oh, you mean that I spent my entire life not raping and murdering people so that I could just be gypped by this? And you're like, oh, okay.
I don't want to eat baklava.
Exactly.
I want sky cake.
I want baklava.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
But so yeah, the image might be, and that's kind of, I can understand why someone might quibble, because like, why ants? This is ridiculous. Like some of that might not be very shocking.
I have a theory, and I think we're at that point. But
all right, well, color me intrigued.
Almost. Can I just wanted to say real quick aside, it's evocative of Greek mythology. In that
the Sisyphus,
you cross
or
the
Tantalus
river Styx, and and it's pretty much that, like, it doesn't matter what you do or how you do it, that's just your end goal. That's the end game, no matter what. And
even then, though, it feels like in Greek mythology there is still some idea of like being punished, or there's flagellation for having defied the gods. So at least it felt like there was some sort of morality being espoused. True. So when there is nothing and it's just a roulette wheel, and even then there's no chance, it's just everything's condemnatory. By the way, you are going to be marching in a line of miserable, like you're a easily led automaton, you're a lemming for the remainder of existence, and it doesn't end. It puts me in a state of despondency that I don't want to, not just because I'm
wearing the shirt, but the new Foxing album has a song on it called At Least You Found the Floor, and it starts off as almost like a sweetheartish ballad of like, you know, hey, you found the floor, this is bottom, but then the song takes a turn and it rips the rug out from under you and said, well, there's a lot further down to go, is essentially the the gist of the song. And I feel like that's what we're hitting on.
Yep.
Before I forget to, we've mentioned Dr. Sleep a couple times, and I read a very interesting tidbit that Revival originally was supposed to be adapted into a movie. And
it is in the offing currently as we speak, as a matter of fact.
It has died.
I read that it got shelved again.
Yep.
Oh no. Well, I was excited by who was supposed to direct it.
Yes, it was supposed to be Flanagan, the guy who did Dr. Sleep. So I thought it was really interesting that was a thing. It would have been really cool. So my theory, and take this with a grain of salt because it's been easily over 10 years since I've read this book, but Stephen King wrote a very, very lengthy book called Under the Dome. And if I recall somewhat correctly, one of the big payoffs, or one of the things near the end.
I will stop you because I actually have not read Under the Dome yet.
Okay, well,
blocked.
Then I will say
you're welcome to disclose what your thoughts are, and I'll just hum my way over.
I see where you're going, John. That's really interesting.
I can't. So
okay,
now you have 1,200 pages of homework just to read 50 pages at the end.
It's on the list as a matter of stern
fact. In fact, I might look for the audiobook for that, because I think that it's a very, very long read, and I own it, but now that I know that I like audiobooks, why not try it the other way? But
I would recommend.
That was one of my first Stephen King books.
Oh my god. And I remember it was on the list of things that I snagged from Libby recently and started running through, and I wound up doing Revival instead, but I got them both at the same time, and I realized Revival would be a far less of a well to dive down, so that's why I started that. But nice. I had it in the run, so once I finish Lisey's story, I may be able to just dive right into that. So
Courtney,
table that for later.
Courtney, you've done Under the Dome?
I am intimately familiar with the TV show.
Oh, okay. No, don't even say anymore.
But that led me to read more about the actual.
Gotcha.
Oh no!
Okay.
Oh no!
Oh no!
No,
he's gone rogue.
So, Jonah and I, and then his uncle and aunt, we watched the show as a joke because it was horrific.
That's what we're doing with True Blood at my house right now.
It did get me interested in the actual, like, what is behind this, because this is absolute flaming garbage.
Yeah, the show is god awful. I watched 2 episodes. I was like, nope, I'm not gonna do this again. I was too attached to the source material. So,
but pink stars are falling in lines, John.
Yeah. Yep.
Pink stars are falling in lines above the Arby's.
This is a Wendy's, not an Arby's.
Oh. Oh, Michael.
Well, look at him
Aw.
trying.
Not a
I
thought
just
behind
want to
those eyes.
participate. Aw.
Hi, welcome to Chili's.
Yeah, well, sir. Well, I know there's probably more to be said, but
I'm sorry. I feel like I wrecked your climax.
No,
Which
no,
is
not at
typical
all.
for me.
No,
you
it's
know,
just it's just blue
you
balls.
did-
He'll take care of it later.
Yeah, you did the
know,
best
it's-
thing that you could, which is just to kill it before it spread.
Okay.
Do we? And again, if there's more conversation, that's fine as well. But do we have another book picked out, or are we just waiting for Courtney to read Dune, and then we'll just do a Dune cast?
I mean, I
Mike,
feel like
you've read Dune,
save
Michael?
this. No, but I can easily start.
How about you guys? I vote Dune because that's topical. We got the movie coming out, and also I don't know if you want to be around us or if we want to be around each other physically, but I would love a romp to a movie theater like we did in the
I'd
past
love
for
a
Doctor
romp.
Sleep. We could bring Jessica with us because she's read Dune. We could even have Jessica come on and talk Dune with us
Mhm.
as our fifth business.
Indeed.
You know, she could
True that.
usher in our Dune talk.
And then I can do to y'all what John was planning on doing. I'll just start talking about the further books in the series and just ruin your lives by saying,
Please.
here's stuff you're never going to get to.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, you can spoil the appendixes. You know, you can just be like, yo, here's all the inner workings of here's all the lore.
You telling me you want me to get your
Ooh.
appendix out?
I want you to get
Ooh,
these guts.
tasty lore.
You'll have appendicitis when I'm done with you.
I hope so.
Ooh-wee.
Sign me up. Maybe.
Sure.
Well,
Maybe that's one of the ways you could be dispatched once, Jacobs opens the portal to the knoll.
yeah, before you get fed to mother.
Just, you can just pull your appendix out. Also, that as a closing line for the bulk of, like I've said, King is one of the sort of great scribes of a really memorable turn of phrase. And so the opening lines of many of his books are ones that will just linger with me into the
Like,
grave.
I'm not a crying man. Or I never was a crying man.
Or everybody's favorite, the men in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. Like there's a lot of these things that linger, but the ending sentence, just even one hearing it disturbed me enough, but then going back and looking at it on the page is the finality of I will come to mother, fucking ruined me. And that word is the only one I can use. So I will, we're ruining our YouTube cleanliness here.
There.
But yes,
I did.
When I finished that, I remember just, again, context, it was 3 a.m. and I was sitting in a bathroom with the light on, trying not to wake my partner up because I'd heard that in the middle of waking up from having fallen asleep. And then that was the soundscape that I woke up to was, and John's heard the audiobook. I'm not sure if everybody went that route or
I did.
not.
Okay, but the segment of that audiobook is pretty harrowing, hearing him describe the hellscape that opens up in the knoll. That's what I woke up to out of a pretty cold sleep, not realizing I'd fallen asleep listening to the book. So then having jumped a significant portion of the narrative to just have that thrown at my feet, I was like, what the hell just happened? So then I had to go back, get to the point in the book where I remember having left, and then read the remainder to get back up to that point. And I was rocked by the time I read that last line.
I mean, how could you not be? Yeah.
Not fun.
Well,
But-
I really appreciate that you found the book and recommended that we all get onto it. It was another good find on the Shane Hunt train. So
I'm nothing if not a king apostle at this point. I feel like it,
very much so. Yeah.
the rock upon which his church is being built presently. So I look forward to being similarly crucified in his fashion later on. But
We should start a Stephen King based cult.
Nope. Anyway,
we'll call it a revival.
Ooh.
Stephen King revival.
is a
Yeah,
comeback.
King revival. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. Also,
Well-
nice new mic there, Courtney.
Thanks.
It's beautiful. So all hail the Crimson King, as we say.
Ooh.
And
There are other worlds than these. Yeah.
that's what I
Got too
hear.
excited there.
And then we just start all over again. because Ka is a wheel.
Yes,
But
it is.
thank you all for sticking around with us. And if we haven't already dissuaded you from reading the book, I will hope that if you're intrigued enough and you have not read Revival by now, I would give you 2 enthusiastic thumbs up and recommend you go check it out, because even with the nonsense we've spoiled here, there is a significant amount of bliss and joy to be found. The devil is in the details in this particular tome, in my opinion.
Yes, it is
Very
the
much
journey
so.
for
Yeah.
sure.
And anybody who was an adolescent attempting to express yourself musically, that whole section in the middle,
Oh.
particularly
Yeah,
talking
dog.
about how your sweat smells
Yep.
when you're nervous and getting up on stage, and
Or-
how terrified you feel getting into that situation.
Or his descriptors of being high, not heroin high, but like smoking pot or getting drunk before playing and all that. I was like, oh yeah, that's happened. That's been a
So
thing.
as a funny side effect here, I will mention that I read another book immediately after this that I was going to cover with Scott, and I think Scott was not impressed, and I wasn't entirely thrilled either. But it was another tome about a band who, through sort of a weird Lovecraftian tie-in, conjures forth the Yellow King out of Carcosa. So for those of you who have enjoyed True Detective season 1 or are familiar with the Lovecraftian mythos, which brings in our good friend who wears the headphones in the Lovecraft fan fiction that we were.
It wasn't Haster. No, it wasn't Haster.
Yes.
It was Haster. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So
No,
Haster.
Azathoth was the
yes.
one with the headphones. I remember that lore very well.
Yes. So Haster is brought into this story, and again, Azathoth is involved as well. But that is one of the iterations of the Yellow King here, as there is an elder god that I'm forgetting off the top of my head here. And the gentleman's description of playing music was so ghastly that it was obviously it's someone who obviously has never played music before, wanting to sound like they played music, because it's things like, from the second that he struck that jarring power chord and barreled into the opening sequence of Mother Love, the crowd was completely ensnared. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I sat there the entire time thinking how ham-fisted it felt for this person to describe playing music next to someone like Stephen King, who plays music and can tell you all these fucking songs are in E. The first thing you got to learn is learn a bar E. And I'm sitting here going, like, as a musician, it's like catnip candy for me. I'm sitting there the entire time going, like, this man knows what the hell he's talking about. And it doesn't mean a thing to anybody, even if you don't play music. You're not looking for the authenticity of it. But when the guy's describing a high school experience, being terrified and just kind of running through and vamping and going like, does it go to C there? Like, try it again. Like, a lot of these things resonated with me in really weird ways. So then to see what the other side of that coin looks like with someone who's hapless and doesn't know how to describe it, it's one of the things that makes me love and appreciate Stephen King's writing more, is because he doesn't throw stuff out that he's not capable of describing in detail. He has, in some way, shape, or form, empirically experienced many of the things that help to make the story a little bit more organically sort of stimulating to you as a reader, because you can relate to those things. They're the touchstones that give it that reality that you need for a story.
He definitely does his homework. Whoever he writes, whatever he writes about, whatever their profession, etc., he always knows what he's talking about.
And that's kind of the right what you know
point to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why a lot of the characters are authors, or things revolve around those similar things.
Or arts.
Yeah. Yes. So,
Or
anywho,
instructing.
sorry. I do tend to get off on tangents, but having run through, it's the final reconciliation, by the way, for those who are keen on checking the book out.
Well, after your glowing review, I don't know how I could not.
It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, and I was intrigued enough by the concept because I loved the first season of True Detective, and sort of the weird Lovecraftian kind of underpinnings of that really tickled me by the time you get to the end of it. Spoilers. So I was hoping for a lot more out of that story, but coming out of Revival, I was like, oh, I'll stay in the same vein. It'll be different. And it was just every silly, obscene sort of cliche of it's a a succubus woman. I've said it jokingly so often now I can't say it. It's a succubus. But it's the typical succubus woman who starts out as a fan and seduces the lead singer and then proceeds to just sort of infiltrate the entire band by sexually pitting them against one another and then using all of them. And what's even worse is she's able to manipulate them because the Yellow King manifests through her eyes. And so she can bewitch them and make them do whatever she wants. And the guitar player describes it as, I remember these things happening, but then he never tries to confront her and never wants to bring this thing to light. It's just like, well, we all knew it was going bad, but we just decided to hold on like hell and hope that we made it through. You're like, no, you wouldn't do this.
The game was that good. I just couldn't say no.
Exactly. And they actually describe her as Yoko at one point, and I'm like, God.
I wanted to say that
hilarious.
as a joke, but I was like, you know what? No, I don't want to go that far. I don't
Just
want to
beat the cliche over the head until it can't stand up anymore. Yeah. So I'm sorry for all of those who are looking forward to it, but yeah, I wasn't impressed.
Fair enough.
All right, I think that's a decent enough point for us
absolutely.
to finally go through the ivy-covered door and wander our way out into
the knoll.
Whatever.
The knoll.
That's how I feel.
I will say before we wrap up, though, the way that he wrote Jamie and Astrid in high school and their love story, like, had me feeling some kind of way.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, it brought back a lot of those like first love.
Yeah, that was the hook. That's what I was trying to thank you for saying that,
like
because that's what I was
and
trying to say.
Oh.
As you I'm a fundamentally flawed person. I couldn't think of the word true love and first love. I was like, it just felt like a way, you know?
It just
I'm
it made me feel
jealous.
like, what's the opposite of anxious?
Diarrhea?
Oh,
yeah.
happy, optimistic. Oh, got it.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, that wasn't my first first romance, so it didn't click for me like that.
Oh Jesus, here we go.
No, I don't. I've already mentioned it
tissue
before, so I'm not going to. But I wish I was jealous of that true love shit. So anyway,
Well, the thing that I've
love you. It's me. I'm your true love.
It'll take me a couple more decades before I fully realize that.
Okay.
At least 11 years.
Yes.
Break a couple mirrors, you'll get there. The thing that I have described with King, and it harkens back to what I was saying earlier, but Courtney hit it on the head, is I refer to as kind of the candy cane technique, is that he takes things that are so realistic and authentic to human nature and experiences. And then when you bring the supernatural element in and you kind of enfold and twist them together, you're a little less incredulous about a lot of the things that happen, because so many of those other things have resonated with you personally, that he can then afford to, whip a little bit of the nonsense at you as the rube that I am. I want him to hurt me. And so like it in particular is always one of my favorite, because there are so many interesting hallmarks and kind of touchstones of being an adolescent and dealing with feeling so weird and falling out, and the body.
That's a book that makes me feel a certain way, and a movie as well, like capturing how it feels to be like a kid.
It's the thing about 11/22/63 that I just love and revere as well, and because you buy into Jake and Sadie's romance so hardcore by the end that you don't
stuck with
care.
Me, that story in particular.
That ruins me. The spoilers, but I've mentioned that is still one of the worst, kind of most harrowing moments for me reading a book, is when you get to that scene. I'm like, why did you have to take this from me? And it's like, well,
that's life.
That's show business.
Yep. Nothing ends the way you want it to. And then again, I will come to mother. So I think that clears my air pipes here. And
I am satisfied.
You always leave me smiling.
I have the banana. Sorry, there's a French guy on Forged in Fire that did that the other day, and it's just ruined me. It's this. Look, I'm happy I have the banana.
You should try that more often.
I'm working on it. So Thank you all for being here. This has been an exceptionally lengthy version of what had heretofore been After Dark, but I think I'll have to come up with another name and some artwork for the book club here, because I feel like this is going to be a different animal, a horse of a different color, if you will, perhaps a zebra. But thank you all for enduring this. I hope you enjoyed, and please go check the book out. You get 2 thumbs up from Shane. John's giving you like a half-hearted thumbs in the middle, and
my thumb is located at 2:00 as opposed to noon.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, Michael.
I just wanted to be pedantic.
Michael, okay.
That's my life. Unnecessarily pedantic.
Yes, now, now.
My life, it's now or never.
Why did you Bon Jovi me? Courtney, how about you?
No, 2 thumbs up. I really enjoyed it.
Marvelous.
Mine are actually at noon. Just so.
Well,
Oh, I was really worried. Thanks.
thank Quab for that.
No two. No.
I'm just really
2:30.
self-conscious about my thumbs. I can't.
Oh,
show them to
good.
you.
Oh,
That's
I'm glad
fair.
that 3 of the
I know.
members of this show have 2 working thumbs.
Yeah.
Mine can just do this.
I can't get it up all the way.
Sounds
Way
like
to
another
flex,
problem
way
for
to
another
flex your
time.
privilege, all right?
They have pills for that, John, just so you know.
If you have 2 thumbs that aren't exactly working, I would prescribe Nebutal. All right. Well, and also shout out again to super fan Michael, who I know is waiting with bated breath for this to conclude. And I have instructed him to lay siege to the comment section, because there's a lot of stuff that he threw in on Facebook that I'm sure would factor into the discussion. Sorry, we didn't have you involved, but this is kind of, we got to wing these things together while we can.
It's going to be a busy few months here. So it's hard to coordinate that shit.
No question.
And also, I don't know if we said it on the episode proper, but feels cool to have more listeners. So thank you for being one of them.
Most certainly.
Appreciate you.
So are we going to sign off with our newly formed names that we came up with on this week's episode?
I'm okay with passing on it. But
oh, how dare you?
Let's do old school. I mean, we don't get to sign off the proper way
you don't
anymore.
Get to sign off
I don't get to sign. I don't get to sign off as much anymore. I miss that.
That's fair. Okay,
all right,
I'm
then.
down for that.
I still wanted to be Wanda Clusters.
I can always.
You will be
can be
one of
Wanda
the clusters in
Clusters.
our
I'll always
hearts.
be.
it's fine.
I'll always be your Miriam Guava.
Bless you.
Ugh.
All right. So, ladies and germaphobes, thank you for being here. As always, we have got a link tree down below. So if you want to suss us out anywhere else on the interwebs, we have new episodes of our podcast winging your way every marvelous Monday morning. And we are back here on the tubes of you every wacky Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. For all of you sitting at home that just can't get enough of us, we have got playlists galore here with prior content, including I think we got over like 4,000 views on some of these things now as the award we were given. So what a marvelous world we exist in. So
Nice.
dive in, check
Nice.
things out. And if you're not sure where to dip a toe in the water, we have our greatest misses on here as well, which contains some of the most popular episodes of the podcast. So you can check those out and see whether or not you feel like sticking around. But if you're digging what you hear on this glorious little show, our mumble-mouthed friend Michael has got some instructions for you.
Smash that like button, ring the bell, leave a comment, and just subscribe.
Subscribe.
Sounding very subscribe.
Oh yeah,
Interact,
really
engage.
Yeah.
Just engage. Just interact, please.
Back to Star Trek
I ask.
again. Engage. Lemurs.
Now that I am visual,
Lemuria.
I'm surprised I wasn't talking like this the whole time.
Me too.
Hey, if
can
only you
stop
were.
now. There we
I
go.
just smacked my mic,
You
so
son
I
of a-
deserve that.
That's called karma.
And remember, if you are enjoying us on your preferred podcast provider app from time to time, please let us know how much you love and care for us. If you dig what we do, please rate and review. We'd love to hear from you. And hitting that subscribe isn't going to hurt nobody. Just saying. All right. So for the first stirring installment of the Disinformed Book Club, I'm sure we'll find some way to make that a little more palatable. I am Kenton Eldorado.
I am Timothy Lone Cactus.
I am Algernon Greer.
And I'm Jean Grey Ghost.
Thank you all for hanging out, and by the eternal behold,
Halt.
Behold.
we will, in fact, come to mother.